Hello everyone. In this video, we're going to be covering a topic from Cambridge IGCSE Biology, the topic of characteristics and classification of living organisms and subtopic features of organisms. Now, in the previous video, we learned about the 5 kingdoms, and we learned how when we take the living organisms, we first classify them into one of 5 kingdoms. And one of these 5 kingdoms was the animal kingdom. So basically, in this video, we're going to be learning about the groups within the animal kingdom. So when we talk about the animal kingdom, there are actually 2 main groups that we're going to be talking about. There are a group of animals called the arthropods, which is basically discussed in this slide over here. And there's another important group of animals called the vertebrates, which is actually discussed in the next slide. So let's first start with the arthropods. We're going to be learning about these animals called the arthropods. So here are some examples of arthropods. Now, when we consider these arthropods are all invertebrate animals. Now, what does this term invertebrate mean? It basically means that all these animals which fall under this group do not have a backbone. And in addition to that, there are actually 2 other unique features of arthropods. The first feature being that all arthropods have jointed legs. And the second feature being that arthropods have an exoskeleton. So these are 2 other unique features of arthropods. And now let's take a look at the subdivision of arthropods, the groups within arthropods. So when we learn about the arthropods, there are basically 4 other groups within the arthropods. There are a set of arthropods called the arachnids, and there's another set of arthropods called the crustaceans, and there are these other arthropods called insects, and finally the 4th group are the myriapods. So when we talk about the arachnids, basically this includes animals such as spiders and scorpions and so on. Then crustaceans include animals such as crabs, lobsters, etc. Insects include animals such as the ladybug, ants, flies, mosquitoes, butterflies, and so on. And the myriapods include animals such as the centipede and the millipede. So basically, we're going to be taking a look at the main features of these groups. Now, when we consider the arachnids, we can see that if you take a closer look at their body, you can see that their body is made up of 2 parts. The arachnids have an abdomen and a cephalothorax. And if you count the number of legs, you will see that the arachnids have exactly 4 pairs of jointed legs. And a closer look at the arachnids will show you that they don't have any antennae. So these are the main features of the arachnids. So now let's move on to the second group of arthropods, who are the crustaceans. Now, crustaceans include crabs and lobsters and prawns, etc. So if you think about the crustaceans, these crustaceans have more than 4 pairs of jointed legs. And a unique feature of them is that chalky exoskeleton. Now, we've all seen the hard shell around a crab and a lobster, right? So that's their hard exoskeleton. And the next feature is that crustaceans breathe through gills, and they all have 2 pairs of antennae. Then moving on to the third group of arthropods, which are the insects. Now, this is a group that we are very well familiar with. We see ants and mosquitoes and so many types of insects on a daily basis. So when we talk about the insects, the body of an insect basically has 3 parts. The body is made up of the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. And when you count the number of legs, you will see that they have exactly 3 pairs of jointed legs, and they have 1 pair of antennae, and they also have 2 pairs of wings. So these are the important features you need to keep in mind about the insects. And that brings us to the fourth group of the arthropods, which are the myriapods. And like I mentioned, this includes the centipede and the millipede. Now, the myriapods are a group of arthropods who have long bodies, and their body is divided into many segments. And if you study each segment, you will see that each segment contains at least one pair of jointed legs. And a closer look at this myriapod will show you that it also has a pair of antennae. So these are the four groups within the arthropods, and these are the main features you need to keep in mind. So that's about the arthropods. And now that we've completed this group, let's move on to the next group within the animal kingdom, who are the vertebrates. So let's quickly move on to the next slide where we're going to learn about the vertebrates. Now, the vertebrates are basically a group of animals who have backbones. So an animal with a backbone is called a vertebrate. And when we talk about vertebrate animals, there are actually 5 groups of vertebrates. What are these 5 groups? We have the fish, we have the amphibians, we have the reptiles and the birds and the mammals. So these are the 5 groups of vertebrate animals. And now let's take a look at each of these groups of vertebrates. So let's start with the fish. Now we all know examples of fish. We have sharks and salmon fish and rare fish and so on. So let's take a look at the main features of the fish. So fish usually live in water, right? So they have wet skin. They have loose, wet scales on their skin. And how fish breathe is through gills, right? They have gills for their respiration. And with regard to the reproduction of fish, fish lay eggs without shells in water. So fish lay their eggs in water, and these eggs do not have shells. So those are the main features you need to keep in mind about the fish. Then moving on to the second group of vertebrate animals, which are the amphibians. Now, when we think about the amphibians, this includes animals such as the frog, the toad, the salamander, and so on. So let's take a look at the features of these organisms. Now, the amphibians, they have smooth, moist skin. They have moist, slimy skin. And if you take the adult amphibians, they usually live on land, while the larvae usually live in water. So with regard to their respiration, the adults usually have lungs to breathe in and breathe out, while the larvae usually have gills for their respiration. And finally, if we look at the way they reproduce, amphibians, they too lay eggs without shells in water. So basically, this is the same feature we learned for fish, right? Fish and amphibians, both of them, they lay eggs in water, and these eggs do not have shells. All right. Okay, so that brings us to the third group of vertebrates, that are the reptiles, right? Now, when we talk about the reptiles, this includes animals such as snakes and tortoises and lizards and so on. So what are the main features of these animals? They all have dry skin. They have dry, scaly skin, and they too lay eggs, but they lay their eggs on land. So unlike the other 2 vertebrates, the reptiles, they lay their eggs with rubbery shells on land. So that's about the reptiles. And that brings us to the fourth group of vertebrates, which are the birds. Now, the birds are a unique set of animals. They are unique because they are the only animals who have feathers on their body, and they are also the only animals that have a beak. So in addition to these 2 features, birds have 2 legs and 2 wings instead of 4 limbs. And birds also lay eggs with hard shells on land. So birds too lay their eggs on land, and their eggs are covered with a hard shell. And let's take a look at this last feature given here. Birds are endothermic. Now, what does it mean to be endothermic? The term endothermic means that birds are able to control their internal body temperature. And this is a feature seen only by the birds, which we have just discussed about, and the mammals. Only these two groups of vertebrates have the ability to control their internal temperature. All right, so then that brings us to the final group of vertebrates, which are the mammals. And mammals are basically, we are well familiar with this group. We have tiger over here, whales, cats and dogs and monkeys, and obviously even human beings are mammals, right? So what are the features, the main features of the animals in this group? The most distinctive feature of the mammals is how they feed their young ones. Now, if we consider the mammals, the young feed on milk from mammary glands. So the young mammals feed on milk from their mother's mammary glands. And the other features include having fur or hair on their skin, having a placenta, having external ears, and being endothermic. So these are the features you should know about the mammals, and that brings us to the end of the vertebrates. I hope you all got a good understanding on these two groups within the animal kingdom. So now let's try a few questions. All right, here's our first question. The bodies of these arthropods are lengthy and multi-segmented. To which species does this group of animals belong to? So we've learned of one group of arthropods who have long bodies and the body is multi-segmented. And we know that this group is the myriapods, right? All right, let's take a look at one more question before wrapping up. Which group does not contain animals that are arthropods? So they've given us the answers: crustacean, arachnids, annelids, and insects. So the only group that we have not learned under arthropods are the annelids. So that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you all understood this section well, so stay tuned to our next video.
Subscribe us now for more videos and content.